the biggest leadership lesson I have ever learned is if you have a situation that needs to change it. Don't wait. Yes, you need to go through the proper channels, HR processes, whatnot, but if you have in the case that I'm thinking of, if you have a very toxic environment, it is imperative that as a leader you fix that problem because it's impacting other people's lives. And I think the moment I realized in this particular situation that it wasn't just impacting me as a leader, it was impacting the entire team, and it was as a result of my inaction that everyone was miserable. That I had to act, and I had to act quickly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Catalysts for Change, the show where we explore the stories, strategies, and turning points of leaders driving meaningful impact in their communities and across the country. I'm Adam Lister, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest is Stephanie Coleman, President and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. After spending nearly 2 decades working her way through the organization, from communications and marketing to workforce strategy, Stephanie stepped into the top job in 2025 with a rare blend of institutional wisdom and fresh perspective. She knows the chamber from the inside out and is now leading it into one of the most dynamic and complex chapters in Nashville's growth story. In today's episode, we'll talk about what it really means to grow into leadership, not just professionally, but personally. We dig into what surprised her most in her first year as CEO and how she's shaping the chamber's direction in a fast-changing region, and what she's learning in real time about making decisions, setting vision, and creating space for others to lead. Stephanie's story is one of steady growth, deep relationships, and the kind of intentional leadership that doesn't chase headlines but builds durable progress from the ground up. Let's dive in. Stephanie, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Adam.
It's good to see you.
Excited to be here.
So you joined the chamber in 2008.
Yes.
And spent 17 years growing professionally with the organization, making stops, probably intentionally, in some cases unintentionally, at different departments across the organization. I'm curious, what originally brought you to the chamber and what kept you there for that long?
Yeah. So thinking back to 2008, what happened in 2008? The recession.
It's a major election. There was a recession.
Yes. So I was actually working in D.C. prior to coming to Nashville, but I had lived here previously. I went to Vanderbilt. I had met my now husband. We were dating. I was therefore looking for an opportunity to come back to Nashville, looking for the right job. And I had interviewed with quite a few different organizations, but the chamber really stood out among those I interviewed with. And it stood out for a few reasons. This would have been I started in April, so probably March, April timeframe. I was interviewing. One of the things that struck me is I was kind of ready to get out of government, to be quite honest with you. I felt like at that time in 2008, things were getting more and more partisan, and I was ready to not be in such a partisan environment. That seems strange to say now.
Yeah, those were the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. But even then, I really was looking for a more neutral environment, an environment where the focus could be more localized, and the chamber was an incredible fit for that type of intention. And Nashville itself, I loved Nashville because I went to college here and I lived here a little bit after college. I had built a really strong community that I was eager to get back to, in addition to being eager to get back to my now husband.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that moment in time, not just broadly from a cultural perspective, but the chamber was going through a lot of transition as well. And we mentioned that you have worn a lot of hats at the chamber, from communications to marketing to policy and member engagement as well. I think part of that is because you had various skill sets that were necessary in the moment and in different departments at different times. Also, as an alumni of that Chamber of Commerce at that particular point in time, we were figuring out a new transition, a new strategy. There were a lot of things that we were trying. I'm curious, both in the earliest stages of that, and then as the culture and the strategy of the chamber kind of early to mid 2010 started to take shape, how did that full spectrum of experience really shape how you saw the organization, and how has it influenced the role that you're in today as you're the one actually casting that vision?
Great question. So kind of going back to what set the chamber apart, one of the things that set it apart when I was interviewing was the incredible leadership that existed at the chamber, not just in its CEO. Ralph Schultz had just started maybe a year and a half before I came on board, but we had this incredible group of mostly female leaders, honestly. It was Debbie Dale Mason and Donna Maddock and Janet Miller and Nancy Eisenbrandt and also Mark Hill, who were the executive team at the time. And when I met them, I just realized that they were all these incredible leaders who were driving progress forward for Nashville, and I wanted to learn from people like them. So that's a huge part of why the chamber was appealing to me. And when I look back at those early years, and we dealt with a lot right off the bat. I mentioned, right when I came, the recession was hitting, and so I remember a day where we brought the entire staff together to figure out how we were going to best serve the business community during a recession. And we came up with a plan, and we ended up implementing that plan. And then we won Chamber of the Year in 2009 as a result. So, seeing that this was an organization that was willing to be bold and willing to take action and, kind of stop what we were doing and rise to the occasion in the moment. That was really impactful for me in those early days. And then you see the progression of Nashville, and you see how the chamber evolves to meet the moment every step of the way. So you have the recession, then you have the flood in 2010, where again, we pulled our entire team together. That required an incredible amount of communication and coordination across multiple organizations in the city and even state and federal government. And we were able to provide, as best we could, resources for businesses that in many cases were left out of a lot of the federal aid that existed for individuals. And then after 2010, we hit this kind of this boom era where Nashville became the it city. There was this incredible investment into the community. There are several things that happened that we believe, looking back, really set the stage for that boom. We truly did see investments back into the community that led to this economic trajectory we've seen. And we have benefited from that, and we still are benefiting from that. And then we hit a few other hiccups. We had the tornado in 2020, quickly followed by the pandemic, a derecho, a Christmas Day bombing, just a lot of community challenges that we had to get through together. And every step of the way, we are looking at it from that business lens, trying to figure out how we can be the best resource possible. But there's learnings along the way. And over that 17 and now almost 18 years, the community has evolved. And, we want to preserve what makes Nashville and our region unique and special, that creativity, that Music City brand, the collaboration and the relationships. So much of what has made us successful, we know we can't take for granted. And if I look back almost 2 decades now, largely it's due to leadership, community leadership, public-private partnerships, intentionality, having a plan and working on that plan together. And I do feel like to some extent we're right back in that spot now. We've got this new opportunity to breathe new breath into what that plan looks like going forward so we can set the next 20 years for Nashville.
I think one of the lessons that stuck with me, not overtly, but kind of anchored in a lot of the things that I dealt with in my previous stop, was the importance of partnership and collaboration, that organizations have boards or they have advisors and they have expectations and goals that they have to meet. But rare is it that a lot of businesses need, in a true, authentic, collaborative way, the other to be successful. Totally different on the nonprofit and community side. I think it's one of the most interesting things that I observed was watching businesses who may be in some level of competition with each other partner around a vision or a mission, even if it advanced things that weren't directly in their personal self-interests, but were in the best interest of the community in which they operated, because they saw the value of the community being strong. You became the CEO, as I mentioned, in 2025 after a national search. Walk me through that transition. What was it like for you to step into the role of CEO as an organization that you grew up in? Many folks probably don't follow that same path. They become a leader of an organization that may be new to them, which brings a different set of challenges. you had a lot of familiarity, both institutionally, personally, with the organization. What was that transition like for you?
So, first, I do want to acknowledge what you said right before that question, which is just how incredible it is that we live in a community where organizations who are competitors come together for the greater good. And that happens, I think, because of the fact that we are Music City and we have this creative spirit, and you've got musicians coming together to write songs together, and you also have all kinds of folks from the healthcare industry coming together to solve problems together, and so many other industries, and that really has set us apart. And again, I think it's part of what makes us unique. So shifting to the CEO transition, having been at the Chamber for 17 years, I had the benefit of serving in 6 positions over that time. And so one of the values that I brought to the position was, for a lot of our team members, I've been in their shoes. I understand what their day-to-day is like. I know what they're dealing with. And for that reason, I was able to put the puzzle pieces together to see that the broader scope of what we needed to do as a team to have the biggest impact, because so much of our work is dependent upon each other. It's, across departmental, it's working with outside partners who we have to collaborate with across the entire organization. And, I do think where I sit now, I'm almost a year in, where I sit now, I see the tendency of a CEO to want to operate with a sense of urgency and immediate action on everything. That's a real, it's tempting to want to just get it done right now. But I also recognize, having been in a lot of those positions, who now I'm asking my team members to operate efficiently and operate well, that I have to lead at a pace that is sustainable. And sometimes that means slowing down a little bit. It means bringing people alongside me and making sure they understand the why, they understand the vision. So from the start, one of the most important things I could do is set a vision. Coming in as the internal candidate, I really emphasized that I wasn't going to be a turnaround CEO. I was going to be building on an already strong foundation, but building on a foundation where we could rise to that next level as an organization to meet the community and the region where we are. And we have grown so exponentially as an economy that I felt very strongly that the Chamber needed to grow commensurate to the region's growth that we've been instrumental in helping to drive. And that requires doing things a little differently. So it wasn't so much about what we do. We have an incredibly strong process for setting goals and setting metrics through our partnership economic development initiative, Partnership 2030 now. That has been such a solid process, and it's been a great implementation tool. I mean, it's been well-funded and resourced and supported, that we wanted to continue that, and we are. And we're actually implementing the next plan starting in July. But it was really about how we operate and what can we put in place operationally to make sure we can rise to that next level.
You said something that I think is interesting about knowing the pace of your employees and the folks that are implementing this sort of vision. But I want to take a look at it from the inverse. Mm-hmm. Even the most well-intentioned number 2 or deputy in an organization can't feel the full weight and pressure of being number 1 until they're number 1. You knew the Chamber inside and out, but that top seat brings a whole host of other pressures that are really hard to communicate and share and kind of pass down their importance to other staff in ways that they will also internalize. It's impossible. What felt most different to you as you stepped into that role, and how have you navigated that shift in perspective?
Yeah, it's a great point that I essentially moved from a deputy number 2 role into the top leadership role, and it's a totally different mindset because you're less focused on implementation and you're more focused on casting a vision and creating clarity for the team and direction and decision making and guidance. And you have to stay at that higher level, that higher strategic level all the time. You've got to be thinking long term and not short term. It's so easy to get bogged bogged down into the day-to-day, even in the CEO role. But that's the pressure point for a CEO is you've got to be thinking farther out, and you've got to make sure that you're putting the pieces in place for the team, even though they're very much in their day-to-day, to understand how their work relates to that broader vision. So, that's something, it's not a flip of a switch. So certainly, I had to kind of get comfortable in the seat, if you will. But I at least knew where I wanted to go with it. And I've, I can't say enough about the incredible support that I've had from others, from mentors, from other leaders, from board members, from community members. I have felt incredibly humbled by the support that I've gotten and the folks who are willing to answer my call and help me work through challenges. And I'll continue to lean on that. And then I hope to be that person that others lean on as well.
Well, it's one of the things that I hope that listeners gain from this is how do you kind of shorten that window when someone has stepped in from a deputy role into the chief role. And so I'd love to ask you to think about it a little bit differently with a kind of a deeper question. Deeper, not thought-provoking, but kind of double-clicking on the idea. From a personal experience, one of the things that I struggled with the most was kind of intuitively knowing that you needed to live in the vision space, not in the implementation side. Where I struggled the most was knowing how to clarify and classify something as vision. Silly example, may or may not be true, but is what type of soap or coffee or paper towels do you use in a break room, as an example? You can make an argument that this type of thing has a strategic import because it comes from a local supplier, or it's connected to this, or it's connected to that. Or you could look at it and say, so far outside of my scope of responsibility to pick up whatever kind of low-level example I'm coming up with. How do you think about where to draw that line, and how do you prepare yourself both personally and professionally to lead at that scale so that you don't come back down to a level where you don't need to be operating because it's below what you can do, but because it steals opportunity from the organization if you're not living in that vision space.
Yeah. I mean, the most important thing any leader can do is have the right people in the right seats on the bus, so to speak. So the team is number one, your internal team and how you structure that team. And, I think early on, I came from the team, so I knew everybody already, but I took the opportunity to meet with each staff member one-on-one and just understand what their thoughts, feelings, hopes, wishes, and observations were. And it helped me put a puzzle together that I didn't have clarity on before that. And it helped me understand where there were opportunities and where there were areas that we need to tweak. And that's been an ongoing process over the past year. But, my biggest goal has been, we won't be effective as an organization. I won't be effective as a leader if we don't have the best team possible. And that team, that goes down to the individual level of what each person is doing and really playing to their strengths. So understanding what individual strengths are and understanding if they should shift into a different role or if there's a new opportunity for them or if they're doing great and we just need to encourage them to really embrace their role. So that's been a really important part of not getting too in the weeds because you've got to be able to rely on others to execute the vision. And then there's the culture aspect. So, in the case of what products do we use, because we're a membership organization, certainly we always want to be using our members for anything that we possibly can, and that's just embedded into our culture. It's how do we both support our membership and how do we also understand what the businesses and organizations who are part of the chamber are going through, so we can better represent them and better kind of lend that broader business voice in spaces where it's needed.
Nashville, you talked about it a moment ago, has grown quickly over the last few years, and it continues to grow fast. And we know that growth comes with real challenges, from infrastructure to affordability, workforce, all things that we've been talking about for more than a decade or maybe even close to 2 decades, even connectivity with folks in the community. How do you think about the Chamber's role in shaping what that growth looks like? And kind of pulling on your previous experiences, you were a communications person, you've got a background in storytelling. How do you invest both the community and your team into these new priorities while they're still learning to trust you as a leader, both internally and then externally?
This is where I think I was really fortunate in terms of timing, because we were already in the process of creating the next Partnership 2030 economic development strategy when I took the role, and we launched it and we'll begin implementing it in July. We launched it in June. So we've essentially had this year that we're in to make sure that we have the resources to implement it. But the planning process itself, it answers some of those questions, because we're listening to the business community and the broader community to understand what are the challenges that are rising to the top right now. And we do this every 5 years. And so it's not a 10-year plan. It's not a 20-year plan. It's really what in the moment can the business community lend our expertise, our resources, our attention toward to improve how Nashville is growing. And we know that it has to be intentional growth. It has to be managed growth. There are certainly circumstances where it hasn't felt that way, where we may have gotten ahead in terms of pace of issues like infrastructure, of workforce, of education, of housing, of childcare, all of these issues that have risen up into this plan. But it gives us a focus, and now we know what the priorities are from the business community, which largely come from their employees,
right,
which are the people of Middle Tennessee.
You've talked about growth both from a community perspective, but then also you talked about it at the chamber perspective, kind of having it aligned with growth. And I've heard you in other places, maybe the Rotary or other events, talk about focus on innovation, initiation, strategic growth. What does it mean for you from a chamber membership perspective? You've set some clear benchmarks about what that could be. How do you make it meaningful growth and not just more growth?
Yeah. So from the chamber's perspective, I set a bold goal. I like to set bold goals of growing our membership by 50% in 5 years. So we have 1,800 members right now, and we want to see 900 more. And part of what that requires is, we have to do an internal look at what is our value proposition, and are we creating value that's worth it for a business or an organization to pay membership dues and be a part of what we are offering. And a huge part of that is not just bringing on new members, but it's keeping the ones that we've got. So it's a retention angle as well. But ultimately, the reason that goal was important to me is because we are in this incredible growing economy where we've seen the number of business establishments grow by 50% in the last decade. And we need to be representing a larger number of businesses at the table. So it's really about how we can more broadly share the diverse perspectives of so many different types of businesses across the region in a way that will really create more weight and honestly more clout when we're talking to policymakers and others who are making decisions that impact the business environment. It can't just be the same 1,800 members. We've got to grow. Yeah,
I get asked sometimes what value I get out of organizations that I'm a part of. And my company joined the chamber. It was one of the first things we did after filing our paperwork.
Thank you for your membership.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. As a matter of fact, literally just renewed this week. And
I should be ringing a bell right now.
If we had one, we can add it in the edit. But the value for me is sort of what you were talking about earlier, is being able to anchor. It could be transactional. Maybe I get a this or a that, or I can attend this. But also knowing that you can be part of a broader community conversation and that you are adding kind of real, actual value, however small from my small business's perspective, to that conversation makes you feel like you're a part of a thing that actually matters. And having that kind of communicated back frequently is important from my perspective, because there are a lot of folks, I think to your point, my guess is most of those businesses that have expanded and grown in the last few years are also invested in the community and would find alignment in a lot of these priorities. But that alignment doesn't necessarily mean you have to hit a home run every single time. You referenced Partnership 2030, as one of the Chamber's major initiatives. It has been a major initiative partnership. 20 Enter-Your Year has been for the last several years. How do you carry that vision forward and continuously evolve it as you think about the pace of change in communities going faster, slower, dynamics changing? In February of 2021, folks were declaring in-office work dead, and I see similar stories declaring at-home work dead now. And you can give you whiplash as you think about how you all wrap your arms around a 5-year period of time where you could have both of those headlines exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we worked with our consultant who was helping us with the planning process to make sure that we got right was, this is a 5-year plan. We've been doing this since 1990, so we've got 36 years under our belts of creating these plans, but 5 years is not a very long time. So how do you create a plan where you can have the biggest impact possible? And it needs to be more focused. So it can't just be the laundry list of every possible thing that could fit into an economic development plan for a growing region like Nashville. It really needed to be, what are the top priorities that we know could benefit most from the business community's engagement and resourcing? And so we ended up creating this plan that was, number one, centered around not winning a project or building a building, even though that does reflect positively on Nashville typically. But it's really about improving the lives of people who call Middle Tennessee home. That's why we do economic development. And then the pillars of that plan are community vitality, community mobility, and community character. And it's pretty simple. So under vitality, you have an emphasis on technology-enabled innovation within our key target sectors, and those are corporate operations, healthcare, distribution and logistics, music and entertainment, and what did I forget? Corporate operations, healthcare, music and entertainment, distribution and logistics, and advanced manufacturing. So those are our 5. Innovation, technology within those is what we're going to focus on. We also are focusing in a big way on housing. We know that is one of the biggest areas of squeeze when it comes to affordability, and affordability is one of our biggest competitive challenges at the moment. Under mobility, that's where you see the literal sense of mobility. How do you get people around the region, transportation? How do you hopefully reduce congestion or at least impact commute times in a positive way? Also, economic mobility, so education and workforce, and issues that can be barriers to education and workforce, like childcare, even elder care, the benefits cliff. And then finally, character. Character is really unique in that it came out of this planning process, and it hadn't before, and it's recognizing what is it that makes Nashville and our region special. And it is our Music City brand and our creativity and our service leadership orientation from the business and corporate community. It's also the fact that we are a safe community, but we want to keep it that way. We're becoming more of a sports community now. So really embracing our strengths and growing on those strengths, but also protecting them. We know that just like so many things we can't take for granted, that we're always going to be a place where musicians and creatives are able to come and chase a dream. We've got to make sure that we're nurturing that.
I feel like I'm catching you at a unique time in your career, and was having a conversation recently outside of this podcast about the value of capturing kind of early, nascent, real-time perspectives on people's places where they are in their career, particularly as they're learning. You are almost a year in, which means you've got a really fresh memory of what it was prior to being CEO, and you've got a fresh understanding of what it is to be a new CEO. I would love to get your perspective now on what you think, while you've still got awareness of both of those kind of approaches to work, what successful leadership looks like to you, and what your decision-making compass is when things get complex or when they get tough, and how you think that that's evolved.
That's a great question. I mean, right off the bat, when I took this role, there were issues that were bubbling up that were more political in nature, and And, I had to look at that. I was getting phone calls I wasn't necessarily expecting to get. So this is part of the job that, maybe Ralph didn't tell me. No, I'm just kidding. Ralph did tell me. But being able to react in the moment to some pretty heavy issues that were occurring. And that decision-making point is always geared back toward we are a business organization, and so we've got to look at things through a business and economic lens, and we've got to compare it to what our values are and what our policy priorities are. If it's a policy issue, and if for some reason it's not something we've considered, we've got to take it to our board, and we've got to share the pros and cons of a certain situation and whether or not to weigh in. So it's a pretty deliberate process, but ultimately, there's a lot of conversations to better understand a situation, to make phone calls. And I can't emphasize that enough, how important just picking up the phone is. If you're in a leadership role, if you think you should call someone, you should. I mean, it's always more important to communicate and communicate early than not to communicate at all. Yeah. And I think we can all work on that more because our culture and our society is tugging us in a different direction to communicate in other ways. But nothing beats a phone call or an in-person conversation. So, that's what I really lean on. I lean on relationships. I lean on building relationships and trust. And, I'm trying to do that with all of the folks that we work with on a regular basis. And it's an ongoing effort because trust isn't built with just one meeting. It's built over time. And it's built before you need something from someone and before they need something from you.
You have talked about in this conversation how you have served in a lot of different roles at the chamber, so some of the unique experiences and challenges that they face. That has shaped how you are leading now and thinking about how to lead them now. I'm also curious how it shapes the culture that you're trying to build at the chamber and what's different now with this new vision tied to Partnership 2030, and how has that evolved and modernized with your leadership?
I'll touch on two things. One, it's kind of the moment that we're in right now. So you talked about the moment that I'm in my leadership journey, but also when I look at Nashville and the region, there's been a lot of leadership changes in the last few years. And so there's really a whole new set of individuals at the helm of a lot of organizations that have to work together, or should work together, I should say. And I think that's this incredible opportunity because we are known for collaboration in our community, but we have this fresh start to be able to collaborate in a new way with a bias toward action. And I can't say that enough, that we can't just continue to sit around tables and talk about things, but it's got to end with action. And that's really hard. That's the hardest part about bringing multiple organizations together, is figuring out how to do that. So that's one. And then the other is, you mentioned earlier that I emphasized early on how I wanted to operate, not just what. And the how was innovation, initiation, and strategic growth. From an innovation standpoint, that was, we've got to look at technology. We've got to look at things like AI and automation and data analytics and be much more sophisticated in how we're operating as an organization so that we can better serve our members in the community. It also speaks to emerging industries and how we make sure that we're on the front edge of what an emerging industry expansion could look like here in Nashville. And initiation is being able to, boldly take action on regional challenges. And that might look like bringing together the people and the resources needed to get something big done. It might be initiating a new entity, as we've done many times in the past. And the Entrepreneur Center is a great example of that was formed out of partnership many years ago now, back in 2009 and 10. We are uniquely positioned to do that again, but we need to understand what that gap is that we need to fill, and then be able to act on it quickly. And then we've talked about strategic growth, but I want to also mention, in addition to growing our membership base and who we represent, and that kind of that level of influence and relevance, I always also look internally at the team. I look at the staff members and how we develop them, how we grow them professionally, how we give them opportunity, and how we do that in a really intentional way, because that will ultimately help all of us to be better.
You are someone who I've known for a long time. And one thing that I've always admired about you that I'm not sure I've actually ever shared is that when I found out something interesting or relevant or important to a project we were working on together or that you might find interesting, I might bring that to you. And you may not know of the specific thing I was talking about, but you had learned something related to it, whether you had spotted a trend or you had read something adjacent. So when I would bring a thing to you, it wasn't like it was a completely new concept. You may not necessarily know the word for thank you in Spanish, but you might understand the components of the Spanish language, as an example. The difference between learning and knowing a fact can sometimes, I think, get lost. And the practice of learning and being open and constantly stretching your approach in real time is something that, in my view, really good leaders do. And it's something I've seen you do as long as I've known you. What I'd love to know is, what do you do when you encounter a decision or a challenge, separate from what we talked about earlier, where you're working through some complex issues, but when you don't have all the answers yet, when you're not in the space of I know, but how do you keep learning these trends and getting kind of the muscle memory so you can anticipate how to approach and solve a problem when you don't have the factual piece of the puzzle yet?
That's a great question. And I'm going back to a conversation I had with someone who has been a great mentor to me as I was preparing for the possibility of being in this role. The question came up, are you comfortable making decisions when you don't have all the information? And honestly, at that point in time, I was like, I'm not really comfortable. I want to have all the information.
Let me gather more information. I'll get back to you on that one.
Exactly. Because I do like to be fully informed and understand all sides of an issue and have all the background and details. But that's just not the reality we live in. We do have to move more quickly, and we have to make decisions based on the information that we have. So more and more, exactly what you're talking about is coming into play, particularly in a leadership role where you do have to be able to discern, what's important. You have to be able to discern those trends. You have to be able to think through the different angles of a situation and understand where there might be some red flags that others may not see. And I think a lot of that just comes with experience, and some of that comes with how you converse with people and the questions that you ask them. And you've got to listen, and then you got to be willing to make a decision, even if you don't know all the facts.
I think the best CEOs or leaders that I've seen can really do two things well. They can set a vision and therefore communicate it well, and they know how to make a decision and when to make a decision. And if you can't do those two things well, you're probably not going to succeed. There may be others that have written actual business books that can come up with a better framework, but generally, the best ones I've seen can do those two things well, and the ones that have failed somehow fail in one of those two. As you think about just kind of your own personal routines or habits and values that help you stay grounded in a role that I have seen become all-consuming from not just in Nashville, but in places across the country, the CEO of any organization can become all-consuming. How do you stay grounded and ensure that you're following your own personal routines, honoring your own values, to be able to show up as a leader, both as a leader that's invested in the organization, but also as Stephanie?
Great question. And I'm going to do this thing I did earlier, which I shouldn't do, which is go back to your previous question and then come back to this one. Can't help myself. But you made me think about the fact that for those of us who have a tendency to want to be perfectionists, when you get into a leadership role, you've got to let that go. And the best way you can let that go, nobody's perfect. And if you're trying to be perfect for your internal team or your external stakeholders or your board or your community or whomever, you're never going to be successful. But what you can do is be transparent, and you can be authentic, and you can communicate early and often. And if you communicate what you're trying to do, even if you make a mistake, people are still going to be on board with you because they're going to know that you're doing your best. And so I just want to mention that as it relates to the previous question. In terms of how I stay grounded, how I stay me, I'm so fortunate to have an incredible husband who keeps me grounded. He really keeps me grounded. I have a great faith community in the church I attend. I've got great extended family. I think having a network of friends and family and a faith community and, just people who you can rely on, who know you for who you are. They don't know you for your position or your role. They know you for who you are. I can go and hang out with friends or be at home hanging out with my husband or being out running on trails or with my family or at church, and I can just be Stephanie. And I really appreciate that I can be because, that side of me might be a little sillier than the chamber side. Most likely it is. But you've got to be able to let loose here and there and just be yourself. And that silliness sometimes comes through at work as well.
Yeah. I'll borrow your tactic of going back to a previous thing. But in the conversation I referenced earlier that was happening prior to this podcast, I referenced that if you think you're going to be able to hide your faults and your failings from your team and show up and be the person that just is going to white knuckle through all of the hardest pieces because you feel like now that you're in that top seat, you have to be able to know it all and do it all. That veneer is going to fall away so dang fast. Mm-hmm. And I always found it easier for myself to name those things early on out of, honestly, fear that someone else would spot it before me and think me a fraud. And it was easier then, to your point, to be able to identify those things. And then it invited additional support and partnership because people began to trust analysis and perspective that, hey, I don't have to be the person that knows everything about this thing. I know there are some things that I feel very confident that I know more than others. Yeah. But then there's a whole bunch of other things over here that I'm still woefully in the dark.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that when I started in this role, there were just a handful of occasions, not very many, but a handful of occasions where I felt like I was being compared to my predecessor, to Ralph Schultz, which is crazy to compare us because we're very, very different. But, he was someone who I learned from for many, many years. So I can understand how that happened. And I really had to make it clear to myself that I was just going to be me. I wasn't going to try to be Ralph because I can't be Ralph, nor do I want to be Ralph. I want to be me. I don't want to wear a polo shirt or a half zip sweater every day. That's a joke for those who don't know Ralph.
Yeah, if you know, you know.
Yeah. No, but for as many great leadership qualities as he had, I had to bring my own, and that was just really important for me to learn and also to be able to react appropriately when I did hear people making those comparisons.
Yeah, it can be, jarring on a personal level. But I also would say, and I would presume that any level 5 Jim Collins leader would say this about their successor. I would hope that they would. Otherwise, they might not fall into that category. Is that leader has to be themselves, but also for the sustainability of the organization.
Yeah.
That the organization can't exist and thrive by continuously being versions of a carbon copy of the previous because you're going to get to that pink page and it's a little lighter, and you're going to get to that yellow page and it's almost indiscernible. And you might find yourself one day wondering, how do we even navigate these waters? Because I've lost who I am. I've lost what it is that makes me personally unique. And then therefore I don't know how to communicate this vision because it's not authentic to the way you're trying to lead the organization.
Yeah. There's one other thing I'll just say with an organization like the Chamber, because we are a membership organization and because we have this incredible staff team, I really benefit from not having to be the only face of the Chamber. I mean, and I want to lean into that even more. I know in year one, it has been important for me to be out there and meeting folks and kind of being the face to some extent so people could get to know me as a leader. But I'm not the Chamber. The Chamber is our members, and the Chamber is this incredible staff team that we have who are doing a lot of the work with the support of our members and their resources and expertise. So more and more, you'll see many other faces out in front, and that's intentional because it's who we are as an organization.
You've talked a little bit about the chamber being a membership organization, and I think most people would know that a chamber is an association or an organization made up of businesses. Folks that are in Nashville or have proximity to their chambers in other parts of the country might also know that they think often, or high-performing chambers, in my opinion, think often about cross-sector collaboration with their cities, in our case, metro, the state, neighboring communities. And sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't. You've talked before about the chamber as a mechanism for getting things done. And for folks that may not understand how dynamic and interdependent all of those different entities are to getting things done, could you speak to or share an example where that really came to life? And I'm less interested in the thing, but I'm more interested in kind of what were the component parts to making the idea successful within that collaboration. How did you bring people along that may not have the same vested priorities as a chamber of commerce that is going to be evaluated also by its revenue and its membership growth?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we really benefit from is, again, we've got this incredible group of members and investors who are also members in our Partnership 2030 initiative. We've got about 260 companies and organizations who invest in that initiative. So they're really creating that plan and setting the stage, and they put a lot of faith in the chamber and being able to get things done and being able to get things done through the chamber. An example of that, and I would say in any situation, we're going to look at what does the chamber uniquely bring to this circumstance to make it successful. One example would be the transit referendum of the fall of 2024. Hugely successful. Huge credit and kudos to Mayor O'Connell for putting together a plan that the people of Nashville were asking for and voted for overwhelmingly. The business community in that case, a lot of what we brought to the table was resource. We knew that a campaign of that magnitude needed resource. We already had been working for years on building awareness and an understanding of the need. And, it really culminated in an opportunity to partner alongside the city and other stakeholders to make sure that this was going to be a successful effort toward getting dedicated funding for transit. In other cases, we might be a convener that is leading an effort, or we might be a partner in convening. A more recent example that we're kind of right in the middle of developing is working alongside the mayor's office and the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee around acceleration of the Unified Housing Strategy for Davidson County through Unified Housing Leadership Council, a steering committee and subcommittees that are going to be focused on how do we accelerate the work and how do we accelerate the priorities of this plan that has been so thoughtfully put together. That also requires us kind of knowing what we bring to the table uniquely, which honestly is that power and weight and resource of the business community.
Let's zoom out a little bit. I want to think about a leadership lesson that you have learned, but learned the hard way. Can you think of one?
Oh, yeah. The one that comes to mind first, and, I've talked a lot about how important it is to have the right team and to develop your team and to kind of thinking about having the right people on the right in the right seats on the bus. But certainly, one of the reasons that I even thought it was possible for me to be CEO and be at the helm of this organization is because that's one of the things I loved the most was creating high-performing teams. And I've also seen along my years what it looks like to have the most dysfunctional teams possible. So, to be able to see that comparison of high-performing versus dysfunctional, it's a huge difference. It also makes a huge difference in whether people look forward to coming to work every day or whether they dread coming to work every day. And you can imagine the output that comes from a team that dreads coming to work every day. All that to say, the biggest leadership lesson I have ever learned is if you have a situation that needs to change it. Don't wait. Yes, you need to go through the proper channels, HR processes, whatnot, but if you have in the case that I'm thinking of, if you have a very toxic environment, it is imperative that as a leader you you fix that problem because it's impacting other people's lives. And I think the moment I realized in this particular situation that it wasn't just impacting me as a leader, it was impacting the entire team, and it was as a result of my inaction that everyone was miserable. Yeah, that I had to act, and I had to act quickly.
Yeah, I think about it. There's no like half-life for toxicity. You got to get out the mop and throw it out.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about membership, and I'm curious, or mentorship, excuse me, and I'm curious if you were offering some perspectives or some counsel to young people that may not yet be thinking of themselves as future CEOs of the organizations that they're leading, but may be tapped in the future. What skills or mindsets do you think emerging leaders should possess or cultivate the most right now?
I mean, relationship skills, getting to know people, communicating. It's kind of basic, but saying thank you, writing those thank you notes, picking up the phone and calling people, showing your appreciation and your interest and listening to other people. That's number one. If you want to grow in any career or just grow in life, you've got to be able to connect with people. And sometimes that's harder said than done, but there's ways to do it, even if you tend to be an introvert like myself. I am an introvert.
Second that.
Yes. I mean, to me, what that means for an introvert is it's more likely going to be one-on-one conversations, and it's more likely going to be you're going to be going a little bit deeper than just surface level, how was your weekend and how's the weather? And I think that's a great thing. So with that being said, there's one other thing I'll mention, which is maybe a point counterpoint. One point is plan. Make a plan, and you may not stick to that plan. The plan will change inevitably, but if you have a plan and you begin to work through it, you're going to have so much more success than if you have no plan at all. And the other thing I'll say is don't be disappointed when your plan doesn't work out. So when I think back to my early career days and some of my first jobs, I had no idea where I would end up. And if I had my heart set on something, then I would be disappointed because it wouldn't have been where I am right now. So I think being able to be in the moment and to be doing the best that you can in the current role that you're in with maybe an eye toward that next step, but not necessarily an eye toward 5 steps down the road. And there's always exceptions, right? I'm sure there's an exception to this, but I do think kind of living in the moment and doing the best you can in the role that you're in, but also planning for, whatever it is that you need to plan for in the more immediate is really critical.
I love the framing of kind of your plan not working out. Some of the best advice I got was from a friend and mentor was to be like water, the Bruce Lee line. And the number of times that I've repeated that both to myself and to my kids and to my spouse and to friends, and it's easy because it's easy to understand. We've seen it in action, but it also, I think, gives you permission to say, I don't have to be so rigid in this that it's not pass or failure.
That's right.
I had a friend of mine share with me recently as I was thinking about the metrics for growing this business, that the thinking about the confidence interval is important. That if I wanted to do something in the month of September, but it didn't come true until October 4th, is that a failure? Or did I just, think about its kind of due and owing date as being a little bit different, and reframing how to think about those things. When you think about leadership, what do you know now that you didn't when you started this job?
What do I know now that I didn't? A lot of I'll be granular to start with. What I know now is that my calendar and my time is not my own, but I do have a role in prioritizing and protecting time. So, if I said yes to every request that came through, I would have every morning, every evening, and every weekend day taken up by various requests, without a doubt. So I've got to be able to protect and prioritize my own time so that I can be the best that I can be when I am leading. We talked a little bit earlier about how do you ground yourself. I mean, part of that is self-care. Part of that is making sure that you've got time to rest and got time to, get out in nature and exercise and think about what really fuels you. I've got to do that. And I don't think I quite realized a year ago how intentional I would have to be about protecting that time.
Yeah. That's a common thing that I hear often. And I also think about the Three Stooges. I resemble that remark. But it was helpful for me, and for those of you that might think of what you just said as being just a little bit too touchy-feely, I often thought of it as like, am I reimbursing the organization or paying it back for the things that I'm getting? Or by not protecting that time, am I driving the car without fresh, clean oil? You know, you can't run something into the ground. But it's also important to keep in mind, when I think about you saying, if you said yes, your calendar would be full, the first thing that popped into my head was how many of those things that you said yes to would be aligned to their vision and mission and not yours and not the chamber's.
Yeah.
And what you may find yourself doing is spending a significant measurable amount of time on things that serve the interests and objectives, probably reasonably good interests and objectives, but interests and objectives of organizations that are not the one that you serve,
Right.
which aren't advancing the mission and the vision that
Yeah,
you've got.
that's right.
You are a person who I know is an avid reader. And so I would love to know, as we kind of wrap up today, a book or recommendation, maybe it's a podcast, given the medium that we're on right now, but a book or a podcast that you would recommend for an emerging leader.
When I was preparing for the possibility of being in this role or perhaps another leadership role, I've really dug into multiple books on leadership, and I have several that I would recommend. In the moment that you are pretty sure you're going to transition into, and it doesn't have to be a CEO role, it could be leading a team, but a leadership role, I do think the first 90 days is a great one for anyone who needs a little bit of structure around what that plan looks like that we were talking about earlier. CEO Excellence is another great book that was recommended to me early on, and just really good lessons for someone who's leading an organization. And then there's some other ones I love reading about, kind of historical figures who've made a huge impact on our lives today. And I'll give a couple Doris Kearns Goodwin books, Leadership in Turbulent Times and Team of Rivals. There's also a John Meacham book, Let There Be Light, about Abraham Lincoln. These are the types of books I love, but there's just so many nuggets of great anecdotes of what these leaders who've come before us and have had to deal with a lot more challenging circumstances than what we deal with day to day, what they went through and how they processed information, and how they, we're also imperfect, and we're all human, and that's important to remember. But there's a few for you.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Stephanie, thank you for your time today, and also for your candor. Your story reminds us that leadership isn't always about big leaps. Sometimes it's about deep roots and steady growth and the courage to keep learning as you go. You are not just navigating change, but you're shaping it. And the work that you are doing at the Chamber really shows us and shows me, as both a engaged citizen of this community and advocate for the community, what it looks like to lead with clarity, connection, and have real long-term purpose. If this conversation resonated with you, please take a minute to share it with someone who's stepping into something new or leading through change. These are the kinds of stories that remind us we're not alone in the learning curve. We've got more amazing guests coming this season, so subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at catalystsforchangepod.com. Thanks again for listening to Catalysts for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.